I have worked with people in the final stages of life for many years, and I want to share what I have seen with my own eyes. Death often seems sudden, but in reality, the body prepares for this moment in advance. A complex biological program is activated. I have noticed how the body gradually shuts down peripheral systems. First, the hands and feet become cold, and then the body seems to conserve energy to maintain the functioning of the brain, heart, and lungs as long as possible. It is like a protective mechanism that allows the most important organs to continue working until the very end, even when the rest of the body slowly goes into sleep mode. I have seen people eat less and less, almost lose interest in food, and prefer liquids, spending more time lying in bed, sometimes in unusual positions. Breathing becomes strange, especially during sleep. It can be shallow and rapid at times, and intermittent with pauses at others. The body may feel cold from the inside, even if the surroundings are warm. Family members often attribute this to fatigue, aging, or simple weakness, but I understood that these are not random changes. These are signals that the body is preparing for the final stage. All of this is part of a natural process, and the more we understand these signs, the easier it becomes to be present and support a person in their final days. I want you to know these signs because understanding the process helps reduce fear and anxiety when you see a loved one gradually fading. Sometimes it is difficult to accept, but it is important to remember that the body is not acting randomly. It is its way of preparing, conserving energy, and protecting the most important functions. If you notice these changes in your loved ones, pay attention to them and stay calm, without panic. Presence and attention are more important than any actions. Sometimes simply sitting quietly nearby, speaking softly, or holding a hand means much more than trying to intervene or fix anything. Often, relatives and loved ones attribute the changes happening to a person's age or fatigue. They notice that the person eats less, spends more time in bed, sometimes breathes strangely in their sleep, and think, well, they are just tired or this is just old age. I have seen this many times and can say that this is a misleading impression. In reality, it is not just fatigue or aging. These are signs that the body is entering a special emergency mode, gradually conserving energy and protecting the most vital functions. Understanding these signals helps us stay calm and not try to intervene forcefully, which can sometimes be dangerous. I want to show the real signs of this process. This is not scary information, but rather a way to understand what is happening in the body and why it behaves so unusually. When we see a person who barely wants to eat, whose legs become cold, and who spends most of the day sleeping, it is important to know that these are not random manifestations, they are part of a natural biological mechanism. Understanding these signs allows relatives not to panic but to act wisely, to be present, support, and observe, rather than trying to forcibly fix anything. One more thing, if you want to understand this process more deeply, I invite you to subscribe to the channel. Here, I share rare medical information that is not available in ordinary sources, and I show how to competently support a person in their final days. And if you have noticed any of these signs in your loved ones, leave comments. Sharing experiences helps all of us better understand and accept these natural processes and be prepared for the most difficult moments. Death in old age is essentially a controlled shutdown of the body's systems. I often compare it to the work of a plane's onboard computer as it is going down. First, secondary systems shut down, while the most important ones, the brain, heart, lungs, continue working as long as possible to keep the body functional until the very end. This is not chaos or random fading, this is an incredibly precise biological program that the body initiates on its own. When we begin to understand this process, part of the fear of the inevitable disappears because we can see that everything is following an internal plan, not happening by chance. The dying process can be divided into several mechanical stages. The first is energy conservation. The body restructures itself to expend minimal energy. The second is blood centralization. Blood moves from the periphery to the main organs to ensure that the brain, heart, and lungs remain supplied with oxygen. The third stage is the gradual shutdown of higher brain functions. This is not instantaneous, and many of the symptoms we observe, strange breathing, cold limbs, pallor, or mottled skin, are consequences of these processes. Understanding these stages allows relatives not to be afraid, but to observe calmly without interfering with the natural mechanisms. Energy conservation manifests in various ways. A person begins to eat less, often choosing liquid or easily digestible food. At later stages, the sense of hunger may disappear completely. I have seen this many times. Trying to force-feed a person is not only pointless but also dangerous. There is a risk of aspiration pneumonia, when food or liquid enters the airways, which can worsen the condition. The body decides what it needs, and we must respect this process. When the body enters hibernation mode, it minimizes energy expenditure as much as possible. The person spends most of the time sleeping, sometimes up to 1,620 hours a day. This sleep is not just rest, it is a way for the body to conserve energy in preparation for the subsequent stages. Sometimes relatives confuse this with apathy or depression, but in reality, it is a deep physiological process. It is important not to disturb the person or try to wake them unnecessarily, but to allow the body to function at its own pace. It is also important to distinguish the normal fading process from dangerous conditions such as delirium. Delirium manifests with hallucinations, disorientation, fears, and restlessness. Sometimes relatives see a person talking to imaginary figures and become frightened. I explain to them that this may result from infection or intoxication, and it is important for doctors to monitor it, but not every strange dream is pathology. Unlike delirium, ordinary sleep at the end of life is energy-saving, safe, and natural. Cold hands and feet are another obvious indicator that the body is gradually shutting down the periphery. Blood moves away from the extremities to ensure the brain and heart receive oxygen and nutrients. Outwardly, this can look frightening. The feet may become ice cold, and the skin may acquire a mottled tone, blue, purple, or crimson patches. But this is a natural process, a consequence of slowed circulation, not suffering. Swelling in the legs and other parts of the body is another element often misunderstood. It appears because the heart and kidneys can no longer fully manage fluid circulation. At these moments, scolding the person or trying to fix the situation is pointless. It is a signal from the body that it is gradually shutting down and requires the utmost gentle care. Breathing also changes. It becomes shallow, with pauses, sometimes with a characteristic death rattle, similar to bubbling. This is not a sign of pain, it is a mechanical reaction of the body as the respiratory system gradually fails. Chainstukes breathing, where deep breaths alternate with long pauses, is also part of the normal process. Understanding this allows relatives not to panic but to calmly observe and support the person through presence and care. Consciousness gradually fades. The brain shuts down unnecessary programs, erasing short-term memory. A person may forget current events but vividly remember the past, old joys, important moments in life. Social withdrawal and apparent apathy are ways to conserve energy. Presence of loved ones is crucial. Quiet support, touch, and calm speech help the person feel safe even when they barely respond. Sometimes, what is called terminal lucidity appears. A person may suddenly become more attentive and focused, sometimes for a few hours remembering people and events vividly. This is like a farewell burst of neurons, the brain's last way of saying goodbye. This moment is invaluable, and I always advise relatives to use it for final words, farewells, and expressions of love. Understanding that senses and sensory functions shut down at different times is also important. Vision fades first, while hearing lasts the longest. A person can perceive tone and inflection, but no longer processes words. Therefore, it is important to speak calmly and softly. Every word and touch may become their last anchor in this transition. Even after the heart stops, the brain does not immediately shut down. It experiences a short electrical storm, activity resembling deep sleep with dreams. Some researchers believe that at this moment, the brain runs through the archives, reliving life events. Physical manifestations of death, open mouth, relaxed face, diagonal breaths, are reflex reactions, mechanics, not suffering. In the first minutes after death, it is important not to panic. Take time to calm yourself, close the eyes of the deceased if they remain partially open, and stay nearby quietly. You can call services later, after you have exhaled and regained composure. Your role is to witness, not to fight death. Simply being present, holding the hand, providing warmth, this is the highest form of help. Acceptance and forgiveness are key. Doing nothing physically can mean doing the most. Sitting nearby, moistening lips with water, holding the hand, speaking quietly about love, all this is true care. It is important to forgive yourself for past mistakes simply because you did not know how to act correctly. This is not weakness, it is part of human responsibility and love. Force feeding is a topic often misunderstood. I have seen many cases where relatives tried to make a person eat because they thought, if they don't eat, they will die soon. But in reality, it is not just stubbornness or refusal, it is a signal from the body. When a person stops eating, it is part of the preparation for the final stage. Force feeding can be not only pointless but also dangerous. There is a risk of aspiration, where food or liquid enters the airways, potentially causing pneumonia and accelerating deterioration. Therefore, it is important to understand that loss of appetite is a natural mechanism, a way for the body to minimize strain and prepare for conservation, a process I call when the body enters energy-saving mode, almost like hibernation. Hibernation mode is another remarkable aspect of dying. When a person refuses food, the body minimizes energy expenditure. All forces are directed towards supporting the most important organs, brain, heart, lungs. During this period, a person sleeps most of the day, sometimes 1,620 hours. This sleep is not mere rest, it is a way for the body to preserve energy and maintain vital functions. I have seen relatives worry at first, thinking the person is inactive, but in reality, the body is working as efficiently as possible to prolong brain and heart function. Understanding this process alleviates fear and anxiety. It is not apathy or laziness but a delicate biological strategy. However, it is necessary to distinguish this protective sleep from dangerous disruptions such as delirium. Delirium manifests with sudden hallucinations, disorientation, strange movements, and behavior. Sometimes relatives see a person talking to imaginary figures and become frightened. In such cases, it may result from infection, intoxication, or lack of oxygen. The protective sleep at the end of life is smooth, quiet, and without panic. The difference is subtle, but important. By interpreting a person's state correctly, we can accompany them calmly without adding stress. Cold hands and feet are another sign that the body is gradually shutting down the periphery. This is not external temperature or coldness, it is internal. The heart weakens, blood moves away from the extremities to support the brain and heart. Outwardly, this looks frightening, the skin becomes icy, sometimes with a mottled network of purple or bluish patches. But this is completely natural, showing that the body concentrates resources on maintaining vital functions. I always tell relatives, Do not be afraid of these changes, do not try to reheat the limbs artificially. Support in these moments is not physical intervention, but presence, warmth, calm speech, and touch. Mottled skin is another indicator of slowed blood flow in small vessels. Sometimes the legs show crimson or purple spots, and the nails turn blue. This is normal, reflecting blood redistribution, not suffering. Understanding these signs helps relatives stay calm, observe, and support without unnecessary interference. Sometimes simply holding the hand, providing warmth and comfort, is the best way to help. I have seen how understanding these processes changes relatives' experiences. When they realize that loss of appetite, prolonged sleep, cold extremities, and mottled skin are natural biological mechanisms, panic, anxiety, and the desire to intervene disappear. Instead, there is the opportunity to be present calmly, supporting the person emotionally and physically through touch, gentle voice, and presence. Sometimes it seems insignificant, but such support is the most important. It creates a sense of security and allows the person to pass their final hours peacefully. Mottled skin is one of those signs that many people see and fear, but I want to explain that it is a natural process. Purple, bluish, or crimson patterns appear on the skin. This is not random and not a sign of suffering, but a sign of stagnant blood in small vessels. Blood gradually ceases to circulate in the periphery as actively as before because the body concentrates energy on the brain, heart, and lungs. I have seen relatives worry at first, but once I explain the physiology, they begin to understand. This is a natural stage. Cyanosis of the nails is another sign that tissues receive less oxygen. This is not pain or suffering, it is a signal from the body to minimize unnecessary processes and preserve the most vital functions. Swelling of the legs and other parts of the body is also part of this process. It is caused by the heart and kidneys' inability to fully manage fluid circulation. Fluid begins to accumulate in tissues, forming noticeable edema. At this stage, scolding the person or trying to eliminate the swelling is meaningless. This is not laziness or neglect, it is the body gradually shutting down. Understanding this helps relatives remain calm, observe, and support the person without unnecessary intervention. Sometimes simply holding the hand and ensuring warmth and comfort is the best form of assistance. Breathing also undergoes significant changes. It becomes shallow and frequent, sometimes with long pauses between breaths. I often explain to relatives that Cheyne-Stokes breathing, deep breaths alternating with pauses up to 40 seconds, is a normal stage of dying. Outwardly, it looks strange, but it is a natural response. Sometimes there is a so-called death rattle, a bubbling sound due to saliva accumulation in the throat. This is not pain or suffering, it is just the mechanics of the body, its final attempt to maintain respiratory function. Understanding this allows relatives not to panic but to remain calm, supporting the person with warmth and presence. Fading consciousness is another important stage I have observed many times. The brain gradually shuts down unnecessary programs, erasing short-term memory. The person may forget current events but vividly recall the past, old joys, significant life moments, encounters with loved ones. Social withdrawal and apparent apathy are not indifference but ways for the body to conserve energy. At this stage, it is important to be quietly present, not demanding responses or reactions, simply providing comfort through presence. Sometimes sitting nearby, holding a hand, or softly talking about pleasant memories allows the person to feel safe. I have seen how understanding these processes transforms relatives' experiences. When they know that mottled skin, swelling, changes in breathing, and fading consciousness are natural stages, fear and panic disappear. Instead, there is the possibility to stay close to the person, observe, support, and love without guilt for being unable to fix the situation. This genuine presence is far more significant than any physical actions. It is important to remember that every organism is unique. The speed of changes may vary, and manifestations may be more or less pronounced, but the essence remains the same. The body gradually minimizes unnecessary functions to preserve the life of the most important organs as long as possible. Understanding this allows us to be calmly and consciously present without creating additional stress for ourselves or the dying person. These signs are not only physical changes but also a kind of language of the body. They tell us that the body is preparing for the final stages, conserving energy, and protecting the most important functions. Relatives who understand this language can respond better, be attentive and calm, and offer help through presence rather than interference. I always say that sometimes silence and quiet presence are the most valuable things we can offer in these moments. When observing these processes, it is important to accept them with respect. The dying person may be quiet, weak, and sometimes indifferent to the outside world, but this does not mean they are suffering. On the contrary, the body acts as wisely as possible to preserve energy and allow the last organs to function. Being nearby, holding a hand, speaking gently, sometimes just sitting in silence, all this creates a sense of safety and calm. I have seen how the presence of loved ones during these moments affects the person. Even if they barely respond, the feeling of warmth and care helps them pass the final hours more peacefully. We often think we must do something, fix, control, but in reality, the greatest help is understanding physiology, accepting the processes, and expressing love through simple acts, touch, quiet words, presence. I have often noticed that in the final hours, what is called terminal lucidity sometimes occurs. A person suddenly becomes more focused and attentive, sometimes a slight energy or liveliness appears in movements or gaze. I perceive this as a farewell burst of neurons, the brain's last activity flash, a kind of final spark of life. This period may last from an hour to a whole day, and I always advise relatives to use this time for farewells, last words, touches, and expressions of love. Often, these hours remain in memory as the most touching and significant. A day or two before the end, even more noticeable signs appear. Body temperature may fluctuate, and the skin acquires a special tone, simultaneously cold and pale, sometimes with a faint bluish tint. Relatives often ask, can they hear us? Do they understand what is happening? Neuroscience shows that consciousness fades gradually, not instantly. A person may hear sounds, tone, and rhythm of speech, even if they cannot respond or analyze words. Sensory shutdown occurs in a specific sequence. Vision fades first, and the person ceases to perceive visual images. Hearing remains longest. They may detect tone and inflection, even if the words no longer carry meaning. Therefore, it is important to speak quietly, calmly, and softly, avoiding shouting or creating unnecessary stress. Every word and touch can become the final point of contact with a loved one. Brain activity at the moment of death is truly remarkable. Even after the heart stops, the brain does not shut down immediately. I have observed that, seconds after breathing and pulse cease, the brain can experience a kind of electrical surge. Its activity may resemble the depth of sleep with vivid dreams. Some researchers believe that in this moment, the brain seems to run through its archives, revisiting life events, recalling joys, significant moments, and loved ones. This fascinating phenomenon demonstrates that the body and brain are doing everything possible to bring life to a natural and complete conclusion. Thank you, as always, for watching, for your likes, and for your comments. Your support means a lot.